Leviticus chapter 11 is where we're going to pick up today. And as you know, up through this point in Leviticus, we have been studying almost exclusively the sacrifices and the offerings. And then we have a little bit of a break, if you will, in the teaching about the sacrifices. And today we're going to look at the laws about animal foods, and then we're going to get back into sacrifices a little bit later on. We'll pick up again in chapter 16 with the law of atonement, and we'll have some more about sacrifices and what they mean. But interestingly, like right in the middle of the book of Leviticus, we have some rules and some laws that became a central focus for the nation of Israel for quite a period of time. For about 1,500 years, the idea of being a Jew meant several things, but one of the things that it meant to be a Jew for a long period of time was what you ate and what you didn't eat. And we all know we're going to look at some sections in both the Old Testament and the New Testament about how the dietary laws were very much an essential element of Judaism for such a long period of time. And I want to think about why that is, because we get a pretty good hint in Leviticus chapter 11, not only in what it says, but also in the placement of it. What is the significance of these laws about what people can eat and what people should not eat?
When did the law change from eating what you could eat and couldn't eat? Mm-hmm. When did it change?
Acts chapter 10, verse 9. Does that answer your question? Okay. We're going to read about that. We're going to read about all that. But yeah, it did change. And it changed, it changed in a couple of places. We're going to read about in Matthew 15 what Jesus says about the dietary laws. We're going to read in Romans chapter 14 what Paul wrote about it. And we're going to see in Acts chapter 10.
Did it also say why it changed?
Yes. And I think my hope is, Tommy, after we read both what Leviticus says, and also we're going to look at Daniel, we're going to look at Ezekiel, we're going to look at Acts and Romans and Matthew. After we read all of this, hopefully we'll have a good understanding about why it was that God handed down these laws, what their purpose was, and how long these laws were supposed to last. In other words, one of the things we see here clearly in the book of Leviticus is God says to his people, you can only eat certain types of animals. You can only eat certain types of fish. You can eat certain types of insects, but other types of insects, reptiles, fish, and animals you can't eat. And the question is, well, why? What's the purpose of that? And I'll submit to you that there's a pretty clear explanation of it, and hopefully we'll understand what that is after we finish our study today. So let's start in Leviticus chapter 11. Now, what sort of up to this point in time, what sort of laws has God put out or told people about what they could eat and what they couldn't eat? What about Adam and Eve? What were they allowed to eat? And what didn't they eat?
Everything but the fruit of the...
That's right. So in the beginning, God created everything. He created the plant, He created the animals, and God says you can eat anything, except there's only one thing you can eat. That is the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is in the center of the garden.
Could they eat meat, or did that happen after Jonah?
No, you talking about?
No, excuse me.
Yeah. It doesn't say that they could or they couldn't.
But that's when it seemed like he authorized it.
Yeah, it's sort of presumed that it almost sounds as if all they were eating was plant life before that time. And then Noah comes along, and what happens?
He provided the skins.
He did.
For covering.
He did. It's very clear, and that's a very important thing that God did. He slew some animals to prepare.
Blood was shed.
That's right, blood was shed. But again, we don't have anything explicit about eating animals until Noah comes along. And then at the time of Noah, what has it said? It said that you can eat animals. Basically, it says you can eat any kind of animal, right? And there really is no prohibition. There's no separation between the clean and the unclean animals. So basically, it's wide open. But now we get down to the point, and where are the children of Israel historically and physically? Where are they right now in the book of Leviticus? They're in the wilderness, that's right. They're not too deep into the wilderness yet. You know, they're only not. They're certainly, you know, maybe probably less than 2 years, maybe a little over a year into the wilderness. I think the tabernacle was built and completed about 1 year after the Exodus, and of course there's a big turning point around 2 years. I think God originally planned to bring the children of Israel into the Promised Land somewhere 18 months to 2 years, and then as we know they blew it, and we're going to see that later on. But here we are, so we're in the wilderness, you know, and it's kind of ironic that God would give these dietary laws to the children of Israel when they're in the wilderness. It's not as if, you know, where they are right now, they don't really have a whole choice about what they can eat or not eat, right? I mean, at this point in time, what are they eating? They're surviving on manna. They're surviving on the quail that God brought in. Now, we do know that there were sacrificial animals that were brought in, and so there must have been some eating of that going on. But as far as all these other things, you know, they weren't to the land of milk and honey yet. They weren't in a place where there was an abundance of all different, or an assortment of all different types of food. Nevertheless, God lays these laws down. So let's read and let's learn specifically what they were, and then let's observe a little bit about how the Jews looked at these laws, particularly in Daniel and Ezekiel, and you'll remember those passages, and then we'll see what the New Testament says about this and what the purpose of it was. All right, so let's start reading. Lon, would you mind starting?
I'm gonna pass, I left my glasses.
Sure, that's all right. Tommy, you want to read?
I sure will.
Okay, chapter 11.
Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, tell the people of Israel that the animals which may be used for food includes any animal with cloven hooves which chooses could. This means that the following may not be eaten. Now I'm out already because I'm eating a hog now and he don't eat a good.
That's right. Boy, a hog, that old hog was declared an unclean animal for sure.
I'm in blue.
And you just said how much you were enjoying it.
Yeah.
So that's got to be a double right there. All right.
The camel, it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves. The coney or rocky badger, because although it chews the cud, it does not have cloven hooves. The hare, because although it chews the cud, it does not have cloven hooves. The swine, because although its cloven hooves, it does not chew its cud. You may not eat their meat or even touch their dead bodies. They are forbidden food for you.
All right, so pause right there. So 1 through 8, we have a specific rule. You can eat an animal so long as what? Chews a cud and has a cloven hoof. And we're told specifically you can't eat a camel. Anybody ever wanted to eat a camel before? No. Or you can't eat a rock badger.
We smoked him.
So the camel.
Can't even eat a rabbit.
Yeah, can't eat a rabbit. You can smoke the camel.
Okay. I'm almost done with that one. Anyway. So God makes it very clear. He gives you specific examples of what you can eat and what you cannot eat. And he says if there's any question about it, check his feet, and then check his mouth, see what he's chewing. If he's chewing a cud and he's also got a cloven hoof, then you can just chow down on it. But other than that, no, off limits. Verse 9, Sarah, we're talking about
I
seafood.
can't understand the rabbit.
What's that?
Can't understand the rabbit.
Go verse 9, Terry.
They're from the
He's not
squirrel.
clean.
Rats.
Right here.
I don't know, maybe they seem to have a hoof at all.
No.
You know, maybe rabbits were different.
Rabbit's got toes.
Got toes,
Yeah,
yeah.
they got toes.
Hey,
Choose the cut.
It's the rat family.
That applies to those tree rats too, right? That bushy tail.
Okay, 9.
9, seafood.
All of the creatures living in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any of the that have fins and scales. But all creatures in the seas or streams that do not have fins and scales, whether among all of the swarming things or among all of the other living creatures in the water, you are to detest. and says there to detest them, you must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcasses. Anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales is to be detestable to you.
All right, pause right there. So those are the laws of the seafood. Basically, if it's got
Catfish and frog legs.
Catfish is out.
catfish is out. Why is catfish out?
That's in those
No
scales.
scales.
Scales. What about oyster?
Yeah.
I'd say it.
Frog
Yeah.
legs.
Gotta get
Frog
rid of
legs?
that one.
No. How about shrimp? How about a crawfish? Fins and scales, I don't know. Doesn't seem like a scale to me. It's sort of like a modified scale. How about a lobster? And how about a jellyfish? I don't think so. How about a sea
How you
anemone?
gonna eat jellyfish?
Peanut butter and jellyfish.
You always got an answer. That's an attorney.
But you know, I always thought, and I have started eating oysters just fairly recently. For a long time, I didn't eat oysters because to me, that seemed like just a perfect creature that God had created, put him on the very bottom of the ocean. So all that bad stuff falls down. The oyster eats it, then he dies, and he's got that hard shell. It just makes it like a layer of concrete there. It's sealed off for all time. But then people come along and they harvest those things and they start eating them. It seemed like, I don't know, I still like them.
We need to talk to old Peter about that.
Yeah, but still, God says, pretty clear what animals you can eat. He says certain things you definitely cannot eat. He says, but if there's any question, cud, cloven hoof, then you can eat it. Same way with anything that comes out of the water, it's got to have fins and scales, right? It's got fins and scales, all right, time to eat, but other than that, no.
So
Everything else
alligator is
over.
fine.
What's that?
Alligator is
No,
fine.
No, alligator, well, we see that a crocodile is forbidden because that's kind of in the reptile family.
No females.
And no geckos. It's right here, it's biblical. Don't eat that gecko that wanders into your house as much as you may want to. It's right here. But what do we see so far? God's making it pretty clear, isn't he? There really is very little gray area. Choose a cud, cloven hoof, okay. Fins and scales, eat it, but everything else, it's off limits in terms of animal flesh.
It's almost like, what could they eat instead of what they couldn't eat.
Yeah, that's true. That's exactly right.
Because-
That's one of the major points.
Because,
What can you eat?
Well, a horse is the only thing with a closed hoof, and it doesn't chew its cud.
Yeah.
You
The
know,
horse seems to be a pretty clean animal, doesn't it? But no eating horses. Chicken, that's one of the filthiest animals I've ever seen, but it's okay.
Anything.
But
They eat each other.
can you name something that they could eat as far as an animal?
Can I name something?
Yeah,
It's a foul.
in this.
In this? Oh yeah, any fish, they pull a lot of
No,
fish
no,
out.
I'm not talking about fish, I'm talking about,
About an animal? Cow?
Yeah.
Four-legged animals?
Beef.
Like four-legged animals?
I guess a cow and a goat, basically.
well, a cow has split hoof.
That's right. It's supposed to have
They have to
a,
have a split
has a
hoof.
split hoof, a cloven hoof, and chews a cud, so that would be a cow,
Oh,
right? And I think a goat too, I don't know that much about goats, but,
Yeah.
Yeah,
think
What
so.
about sheep? Do they have some sheep or?
You can eat.
and
Yeah.
sheep too. I guess they
Lamb or
have sheep, yeah,
sacrificial
right.
animals, so that would be clean.
So sheep, goat, cow,
Lamb,
lamb. Okay,
Yeah, they were vegan on that.
not bad.
yeah. All right. More rules, verse 13. Who's up next? More, is that you?
Yeah. These are the birds you are to detest, and not eat because they are detestable. The eagle, the vulture,
Yeah.
the black vulture, the red kite, and any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, and any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, and the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat.
Okay, well that's, Warren didn't read anything that I really wanted to eat. It's okay with me, especially a
We have the
bat.
bat.
Anybody ever think about eating a bat?
Fried bat wings.
Or a vulture, buzzer long,
Yeah.
I don't know. I have eaten ostrich before. My verse 16 says an ostrich, so, but I don't know. That's
Emus and ostrich are good.
Yeah,
Emu sausage is good.
Yeah.
yeah. So, all right. If you eat it and you like it, there you go, you're transgressing the law. All right, now we're gonna get into good stuff, verse 20. Who's that? Is that you, Kenny?
I'll pass.
All right.
All-
Gary?
All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be detestable to you. There are, however, some winged creatures that walk on all fours that you may eat. Those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these, you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, grasshopper, but all other winged creatures that have 4 legs you are to detest.
Pause right there. Why would he make an exception for the locust and basically, you know, any kind of grasshopper or cricket? If it's got, what's the
How much
word?
can a cricket fill you?
All the winged insects that walk on all fours, let's see, but if they have jointed legs that allow them to jump. So jumping insects you can eat, but the other kinds you can't.
You get exercise trying to catch them.
Okay, all right, read on.
You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. Every animal that has a split hoof is not completely divided, or that does not chew his cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean.
Pause right there. So not only can you not eat it, you can't even touch its dead carcass without becoming unclean. Okay, Monica, pick up in verse 27.
Also, whatever walks on its paws, among all the creatures that walk on all fours are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcasses become unclean until evening. And the one who picks up their carcasses shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. They are unclean to you.
Pause right there. So that takes that away. What, the cats? What else walks on paws?
Dogs.
Dogs, okay, so no eating cats and dogs. You know, cats and dogs, they really seem to be pretty clean animals, don't they? I mean, by comparison to some of the others, but nevertheless, they're forbidden. Why? Because they walk on paws, okay?
So rabbits have paws?
Do bears have paws?
I think they do, yeah.
Rabbits, well, you already said they were good.
Yeah. Okay, verse 29. Nancy, you want to pick up there?
These are unclean for you among the creatures that swarm upon the earth: the weasel, the mouse, the great lizard according to its kind, the gecko, the land crocodile, the lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean for you among all that swarm. Whoever touches one of them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. And anything upon which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether an article of wood or cloth or skin or satin. Any article that is used for any purpose. It shall be dipped into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, and then it shall be clean. And if any of them falls into any earthen vessel, all that is in it shall be unclean, and you shall break the vessel. Any food that could be eaten shall be unclean if water from any such vessel comes upon it, and any liquid that could be drunk shall be unclean if it was in any such vessel. Everything on which any part of the carcass falls shall be unclean, whether an oven or a stove. It shall be broken in pieces. They are unclean, and shall remain unclean for you. But a spring or a cistern holding water shall be clean, while whatever touches the carcass in it shall be unclean. If any part of their carcass falls upon any seed set aside for sowing, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed, and any part of their carcass falls on it, it is unclean for you.
Pause right there. So we see that not only do we have the declaration of what is clean versus unclean as far as what you can eat, but if any part of that unclean animal touches something else, then what?
It makes it unclean.
It makes it unclean, and it's either to be destroyed or somehow cleaned. So,
Well, it seems like a waiting period there will cleanse it. I mean, that you wait until the evening, it says. I don't know. So far, they hadn't said anything in there that I probably haven't eaten sometime.
so there's been a time that we've all eaten some of the forbidden foods, and not only that, we've enjoyed it, and we wanted some more. So the line of distinction, some of these things are pretty repugnant, I must admit, right? And so you wouldn't want to eat them. Maybe some people would, I don't know. But the idea is that some of the things that are declared unclean are things that we would want to eat, and we have eaten, we desire, and we want more. So what does this say? It tells everybody you really got to be pretty careful, not only about what you eat, but also what touches anything that you may be in contact with. All right, let's read on. Who's up next? 39. Kim, you want to read?
Yes. If an animal that you are allowed to eat dies, anyone who touches the carcass will be unclean till evening. Anyone who eats some of the carcass must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. Every creature that moves about on the ground is detestable. It is not to be eaten. You are not to eat any creature that moves about on the ground, whether it moves on its belly or walks on all fours or on any or many feet. It is detestable. Do not defile yourself by any of these creatures. Do not make yourself unclean by means of them, or be made unclean by them.
All right, pause right there. All right, so more rules about if you come in contact with them, you're going to be unclean until the evening. All right, so that implies a period of separation. If you transgress the law, the do not touch law, what must you do? You must separate yourself from the rest of the group. It's like you're going to go into timeout for a while. And the idea is, I think, to bring to the attention of the transgressors that you have transgressed and there's a consequence to your transgression. All right, Kathy, we'll pick up at 44.
For I am Yahweh, your God. So you must consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. You must not defile yourselves by any swarming creature that crawls on the ground. For I am Yahweh, who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. So you must be holy, because I am holy. This is the law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground, in order to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the animals that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten.
All right, so that's basically the sum and substance of the dietary laws of the Jews, which they observed. Again, we're about roughly 1500 BC. So these laws would have remained in effect up through the time of Christ. These laws really are not lifted until what?
Until Christ's death.
Until Christ's death. Or at least if you read some of the things that Jesus said, you come to the conclusion. I would say that the dividing line, Tommy says, when did these laws no longer have effect? I would say that from the standpoint of what they were intended to do, at least one of their purposes, that they would cease to have had effect when?
When Christ was born.
When Christ was born, that's right. And then I think they were fulfilled, completely fulfilled at the time of Christ's death. So what's the significance of that? Well, why is it, give me as many reasons as we can think of here, why God would have put these laws. And these were laws that were applicable not to all people. These were laws applicable just to God's chosen people, just to the Jews. So why would God have put these rules on the Jews? Were they arbitrary? Was God trying to keep them from having fun? Why would God have put these dietary laws on the people at this time?
To keep them clean and holy and pure.
Okay, for what purpose?
Because they were the womb of the Messiah.
There you go. Did everybody hear what Juan said? One of the reasons, and if you think about it, there's a lot of sense to these dietary laws. They're basically aimed at making sure that the people, the Jews, ate things that were not just ceremonial clean, but that were clean. And you think about, when we were kids, you don't hear this anymore, but when I was a kid, we were told never eat uncooked or never eat any pork unless it's fully cooked. Why? What was the risk? Trichinosis. See, our kids don't know that. Our grandkids don't know that because trichinosis has been done away with. But we knew about it. Why? You don't eat pork because you get that little trichina worm in that pork, and if it wasn't fully cooked and fully killed, you eat it. And there were people who came down with trichinosis when I was a kid. and they have to treat them. So that was one of the rules. God made these rules to make sure that the Jews ate that which was clean and disease-free, if you will, as much as was as possible. Why? To keep the Jewish race clean and pure, more so than any other race at the time. Why? Because they were the womb of the Messiah. God selected the Jewish people. He set them apart. He gave them certain rules to keep them clean and pure. Why? Because by the time Christ came, Jesus was a thoroughbred in every sense of the word. He came out of the race that was the purest and the cleanest race, and he was the most perfect human being physically who ever lived. He was a true thoroughbred. He was the perfect sacrifice. He was the best of the best by all means. So that's a very important part of it. But that's not the only reason why. That's probably a principal reason, but there are a couple of other reasons why God gave them these rules. Can anybody think of anything else?
They were to be set apart also from the other races that were around them.
Exactly, and we see that in the book of Daniel. Why don't we hold Leviticus here for a second? Leviticus chapter 11, and let's look over at Daniel chapter 1. Everybody remembers that story. Ezekiel, Daniel chapter 1. Who's our next reader? Is that you, Kenny? Why don't we just read the whole thing just so we'll know where we are. All right, the book of Daniel opens up in the year 605 BC. And Daniel at this point in time is where?
In Babylon,
He's in Babylon. And why is he in Babylon?
because he was captured and taken there.
That's right. This was the first wave where the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar went to Jerusalem to plunder the city. He went there first in 605 BC and took Daniel and some of his friends back. He came back again in 597 BC and grabbed hold of Ezekiel and some of his group and took them down to the south of Babylon by the river Kibar. And then the third time he came back was 587 BC, and he was there for 14 months and laid siege and did what?
Destroyed the city.
Destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, killed everybody who was left, took a few more folks back, but Jerusalem's basically in the dark, totally in the dark for a period of about 50 years. The exile lasted a total of 70 years, which is often measured from the date of the destruction of the temple in 586 BC to the rebuilding and rededication of Zerubbabel's temple in 516 BC. But it was a period of about 70 years, of which 50 years was totally dark. Jerusalem was a haunt of jackals. But read that story for us about what's going on in Babylon. Yeah, chapter 1, verse 1.
In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judea, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Aspenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among them were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel he named Belshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah Abednego. Now Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the raw food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile him this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. The official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other men your age? The king would have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, how you say it, and Azariah, please test your servant for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who ate the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead.
All right, pause right there. So we see the point. Daniel and his 3 compatriots were taken basically captive. They're prisoners of Nebuchadnezzar. They're brought into the palace. They're going to be trained. This was like the cream of the crop of the young men. They were strong. They were smart. They were going to be educated. They were going to be, indoctrinated into the culture of the Babylonians. And so a sumptuous meal is brought in front of them. No doubt included some smoked camel and some raw oysters, probably. And so what did they, and some kind of lizard wine, I guess it was. I don't know. But anyway,
I don't like your menu.
they didn't either. So Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, they didn't stage a food fight, right? They didn't rebel. They politely and respectfully asked the guy who was the guard over them, we'd really like to not eat this. And that's the point. Why did they not want to eat that?
They didn't want to defile themselves.
They didn't want to defile themselves. They knew God had given His laws. They didn't want to violate God's laws. But also, we see here one of the purposes that Wanda brought up, and the fact is that these dietary laws, these are one of the things that define the Jews. All right, God wanted all the people of the earth to see that He had given certain laws to these people that weren't applicable to others, but that also what we see in this exercise, that these guys honoring God's laws did what?
Their health was a lot better.
That's right. Their health, it says that they appeared healthier than the guys who were eating the smoked camel and the raw oysters, right? So we see there was a value to observing God's law. So number one, it was their respect for God and His laws, and number two, it was the maintenance of the Jewish culture, if you will. We are Jews, we are God's people, and part of what we do is we eat certain things and we don't eat certain other things. Now there's another unusual thing that we have in the book of Ezekiel. So flip back a few pages to Ezekiel chapter 4. Remember, Ezekiel was also a captive at the same time that Daniel was a captive. They weren't in the same place. Daniel was in Babylon. He was in the royal court. Ezekiel is further south of Babylon, right there by the river Kibar, in a very agricultural area. But God was using both of them, but in very different ways. Wanda, would you read for us Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 9 through 17?
Take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt, put them in a storage jar and use them to make bread for yourself. You are to eat it during the 390 days you lie on your side. Weigh out 20 shekels of food to eat each day and eat it at set times. Also measure out 1/6 of a hin of water and drink it at set times. Eat the food as you would a barley cake. Bake it in the sight of the people, using human excrement for fuel. The Lord said, in this way the people of Israel will eat defiled food from among the nations where I will drive them. Then I said, not so, sovereign Lord. I have never defiled myself. From my youth until now I have never eaten anything found dead or torn by wild animals. No unclean meat has ever entered my mouth. Very well, he said, I will let you bake your bread over cow manure instead of human excrement. He then said to me, Son of man, I will cut off the supply of food in Jerusalem. The people will eat rationed food in anxiety and drink rationed water in despair. for food and water will be scarce. They will be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin.
Okay, so we see here that Ezekiel, he is also very mindful of the dietary laws that govern the Jews. But nevertheless, God gave him a recipe to make some disgusting bread that he was commanded to eat. Why would God give that command at that particular time to him and the other exiles who were there in Babylon?
Well, it says it's to be a symbol of their sin.
Exactly. Basically, he's saying one of the things about the Jews that has set them apart from the rest of the world is that they have honored me, they have followed my dietary laws. But then he says, all right, don't be so bold, don't be so arrogant as to say that you should be deemed pure just because you have followed my dietary laws when you've broken all my other laws. You've chased after foreign gods. So basically, this is a commentary on what? On just how sinful, how disingenuous, how arrogant they have been. Okay, they were sinful, but they're professing their sinlessness. But God says, no, you're going to eat this defiled bread. But even cooking this bread over cow manure, that is still a defilement, if you will, pretty disgusting. So he's saying you're going to eat this. Why? To show the world and everybody else that you're eating defiled food because why? You have defiled yourself already in other ways. And don't pretend that it's okay to break my laws in one way, but not in another way.
So they were picking and choosing the laws they wanted to follow.
Exactly. And God says, no, you're either all in or you're all out. Okay, let's look, and this, we're going to get more specifically into answering Tommy's question now. Let's flip over to Acts chapter 10. And this is a passage that's familiar to all of us. This is the circumstance where Peter has been called to preach the gospel, and Peter was first called to the house, or at one point in time he was called to the house of a man named Simon who was a tanner. And Peter had a problem with that. Why is that?
Because the tanner touched dead carcasses.
Oh yeah, and back in those days, a tanner shop was an extremely disgusting place for many reasons. One of which they would have had dead animal carcasses around in hides, but also part of the tanning process back then is they would have immersed the hides in urine. So I mean, it was just a disgusting place to be around it. But nevertheless, God says, Peter, I want you to go and meet with old Simon the tanner. And Peter's got to, how disgusting is this? I just really don't want to go to that place, and I don't want to meet with a guy who's been doing all those hideous things, all those disgusting
Sure, I'm
things.
gonna shake his hand.
That's right. Don't make me shake his hand, God, or sit at his table or anything else. So, all right, Peter, he respected the dietary laws, but God had another lesson to teach to Peter at this time, and he really wanted to teach him about what the purpose of the dietary laws was and how long they were supposed to last. So, Acts chapter 10, Jackie, who's next? Wanda, have you read?
Yeah.
All right, Jackie, pick 9 through 17, please now. Acts 10, 9 through 17.
About noon the following day, they were on their journey and approaching the city. Peter went up to the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles on the earth and birds of the air. Then a voice said to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time, "Do not call anything impure that God has made." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate.
Okay, that's good. So the point of this is that this big sheet comes down out of heaven, and it's got all of these forbidden creatures on, all the things that God had previously told the Jews in Leviticus chapter 11 not to eat. And Peter is told, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." In other words, have a feast on all these unclean animals. And what's Peter's reaction? Oh, you got to be kidding. He said, I had never defiled myself by doing that. And what does God rebukes him at that point. What does he say? What does he say?
Don't call anything unclean that I've made clean.
That's right. I have made these things, and God is now declaring that these things are clean. So if I say that they're okay to eat, they're okay to eat. What is the larger lesson that God is teaching Peter at this point in time?
Salvation is for all men.
That's right. Even the tanners, even those who are disgusting and filthy. He said, don't avoid people just because they happen to be Gentiles, just because they happen to engage in a trade that would be anathema to the Jews. He says, you're to go and my outreach is to all people. Don't leave anybody out. That which I have declared clean, you shouldn't consider to be unclean or unholy.
Could you make an argument that God changed his mind?
No.
I think God
Christ was born.
He's kept them as a tight-knit community all these years until the birth of Christ.
That's right.
Now it's time to share everything with the rest of the world, because now Jesus is out and they don't have to worry about the purity of the nation to conceive
That's right.
Jesus. So now they got to tackle the rest of the world. So
That's
they
right.
got to tell these Jews who've been keeping all these laws, it's okay to do this, do that, which is totally against their nature after many centuries.
No, but in Jesus' ministry, he went into all and talked to other, like the lady at the well and the woman at the well and everybody else. So he was extending himself.
Yeah, you remember, again, God didn't change his mind. He never changed his mind about this. Remember when Jesus said, I did not come to do away with the law, I came to fulfill the law, right? And so what Jesus did, Jesus is the one who fulfilled every one of the laws, and he fulfilled the purpose of the dietary laws. In other words, once Christ was born, the purpose of the dietary laws was pretty much out the window, okay? And then certainly, because the purpose of the dietary laws was to keep the Jewish race clean and pure, first and foremost, all right? So when Jesus was born, there was no need for it because there wasn't going to be another Messiah. You didn't need to have another Jesus to come along. But the other thing is we're going to see symbolically the purpose of these laws was to make people clean. Well, guess what? It was Jesus who was going to fulfill that. He made people clean by his perfect life, his sacrificial death, and his resurrection. So after Jesus is born and after Jesus goes to the cross to cleanse us of our sins, then these dietary laws, they have fulfilled their purpose and their usefulness, and they don't really have any usefulness anymore. And both Paul in his writings and Jesus himself in his teaching said the same thing. So let's look real quickly at Romans chapter 14.
So is Peter now responsible for telling all the Jews that all this stuff is good to eat?
Well, he certainly can't deny it.
No, he cannot.
He cannot deny it.
But if you remember, when they accused him of going to Cornelius, to a Gentile, he gave that as an example, saying how God said, plus the Holy Spirit came on him.
That's exactly right.
So I think that was the big message. It wasn't so much the food, that salvation is not just for the Jew.
Yeah. All right, you find that, Murray?
14?
What chapter?
Romans chapter 14. Romans 14.
That's Romans 2?
Go the other way. Romans 14. Go back the other way. Romans 14.
Yeah, but is it Romans 2 or 1?
No, Romans 14. Romans chapter 14.
You got Romans 1 and Romans 2 in my mind.
Okay.
All right.
Romans chapter 14.
All
Just
right.
chapter 14.
It won't matter then, right?
No, just Romans chapter 14.
We can do that.
Yeah.
I am on
All right, got 14. All right, start reading there. Tell us stop you.
chapter 1.
Chapter 14, verse 1. Yes, sir.
Him that is weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him that eateth not judge him that eateth, for God hath received him. Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth on or falleth. Yea.
All right, pause right there just a second. So what is Paul saying here? He's saying really it doesn't matter what you eat or what you don't eat. He says some people, he says one man has faith that he may eat all things, but one who is weak in faith eats vegetables only. So Paul has already gotten the news that Peter has conveyed, that God has cleansed everything. So he's saying that if you're weak in faith, then you don't recognize that God has cleansed everything. Now jump down to verse 14, Murray, if you would. Pick up there, Romans chapter 14, verse 14.
Right? I know and am persuaded by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that estimeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. But if thy brother be grieved with thy meat, thou walkest thou not charitably. Destroy not him with thy meat, for whom Christ died. Let not then your good be evil spoken of. For the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost.
Pause right there. The kingdom of God is not a matter of what you eat and drink, as long as you what? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness and his peace and his joy. In verse 21 he goes on to say, though, that it is good not to eat meat or to drink wine or to do anything by which you cause your neighbor to stumble. So basically what Paul is saying here is that what I eat and what I drink doesn't make me clean or unclean, but for the sake of my brothers and sisters, I don't want to eat anything and I don't want to drink anything if it's going to cause them to stumble in their own faith.
The Catholic religion today, they won't eat meat on
That's right. They don't eat meat on Fridays.
Fridays.
Yeah,
Good Friday. And
that's right.
You know, a funny thing, all through the Bible they speak of drinking wine, and they're doing this in front of everybody.
Right.
And then the scripture here is kind of contrary to that.
Well, it's contrary.
In a way.
In a way it is, but because what's saying is that Paul is saying that I'm free to eat or drink anything. What I eat or what I drink is not going to defile me. But if I drink a glass of wine and it caused somebody else to drink some wine or drink too much or drink some wine and get behind the wheel of a car and go hurt himself, so that's a sinful thing. So he says for that reason, be very careful about what you eat or what you don't eat, what you drink and what you don't drink, why, to the extent that it may cause somebody else a problem. So he's saying, again, it's not a matter of defilement, it's a matter of love for your brother and sister.
But then they have two kinds of wine, a fermented wine and just kind of a
They did.
daily wine that was not heavily alcohol that they.
Yeah, and we can spend probably a whole lesson talking about what kind of wine, what is fermented wine and what is unfermented wine. But one thing I read and I tend to agree with is that we know ceremonially speaking that when the Jews were honoring God, they couldn't have any leaven in their midst, right? Unleavened bread. Why? Because leaven was symbolic of sin. And so one of the components of wine, fermented wine, is a type of leaven. So it really doesn't make any sense to me that they would have fermented wine, which is basically the fermentation is a rotting process. Again, symbolic of sin. It would seem to me that the wine that was used ceremonially by the Jews would have been the purest grape juice without anything, any fermentation or without any leaven in it. But again, we can talk about that for a long time. We can talk about
How does distilled spirits fit into that,
into what?
into this wine
Well,
theory?
When they weddings and stuff, they'd have, of course, they'd have the real good wine,
Well,
weddings and things.
and there's no question, but that even on the day of Pentecost, the people were saying, "Hey, these people here are filled with the Holy Spirit. They're acting like they're drunk on new wine, right? They wouldn't be drunk on something that was non-alcoholic." So the term wine is sometimes the fermented stuff, but sometimes it's the non-fermented stuff, and it's very difficult to tell which is which. But we're not going to spend a whole lesson on that today, anyway. Maybe another time. All right. Finally, let's look at Matthew chapter 15 and what Jesus said. Let me just read that for you. Matthew chapter 15, Jesus talking about eating and drinking says, "Then some Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and says, 'Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread.' And so Jesus starts to talk about what makes you clean and what makes you unclean. In verse 10 he says, then he called the multitude to him and said, hear and understand this. Not what enters into the mouth defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth, this defiles the man. Then the disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this statement? But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father did not plant shall be rooted up. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into the pit. Peter answered and said to him, explain this parable to us. And Jesus said to them, are you still lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated, but the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those are the things that defile a man. So Jesus is telling them here, even insofar as the Levitical laws are concerned, it's really not so much what goes in as comes out of your mouth. And if you go back to Leviticus chapter 11, the last verse that was read, let me just read it again, last two verses. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that moves in the water and everything that swarms on the earth. Look at verse 47. To make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, the unholy and the holy, and between the edible and the inedible. So God is telling the people the whole purpose of this is what? To make a distinction. So what were the people to do here? I'm submitting to you that these laws, these dietary laws, were sort of a kindergarten lesson about following God. Because why? Because they were taught to make a distinction. They were told, this is clean and this is unclean. You're supposed to eat the clean and avoid the unclean. They were forced to make a conscious choice and an intentional decision to obey God or not obey God 3 times a day. Every time they sat down at a meal, God wanted them to think, all right, I'm going to either obey God or disobey God. And they did that every time they ate. And that, my friends, I believe was the real purpose of it. God says, these are my rules. It almost didn't really matter what the rules were. It just said, God says, do this and don't do that. So when you sit down at your meals 3 times a day, you have a choice consciously to either follow God or not follow God. And he gave it to them in a very simple lesson, what you eat and what you don't eat. But was that supposed to apply to food only, what you eat? Oh no, that was just the beginning point. This was a 3 times a day reminder. God wanted them to carefully understand and take in everything that he told them and obey it when? All the time. In whatever you do, not just when you sit down at a meal, but everything you do, every time you make a conscious choice, it should be, yes, I'm going to follow God, I'm going to do what he says, and I'm going to avoid what he told me not to do. So this simple choice and conscious act was intended to be the model for everything that they did and we do. Everything we do, everything we say, and really everything we think. And that's the whole purpose of it. Jackie calls time out. But you see again, the purpose of the cleanliness laws would have been fulfilled with Christ. And then Christ says, again, understand, it's not what you eat so much that defiles you. It is what? Number one, it's whether you obey or disobey God, and then what comes out of your mouth that comes from your heart. That is what will really defile you. Okay, good lesson today. Thank you for your participation. You follow along.